Welcome to the Faith Together podcast from the Center for Faith and Family at Olivet Nazarene University. If you believe that passing down Christian faith is essential for the next generation, you are in the right place. Enjoy conversations with guests who are faith practitioners, parents, caregivers, pastors, counselors, and many more. You'll enjoy practical tools and community for passing down Christian faith to your children and grandchildren.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Faith Together podcast, sponsored by the Center for Faith and Family. We are so glad to have you with us today. I'm Lindsay, and of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Leon. Hi, Leon.
Hi, Lindsay. Good to see you today.
Good to see you, too. It is great to be here in our special series we've been in called Ages and Stages.
Yes. So we've been walking through different stages of a childhood life.
Yep.
And looking at how spiritual nurturing takes place in each of those stages, recognizing that God has created us to be different at different stages of our lives, and the way that we learn, process information, and more importantly, the way we interact with God is a bit different. And so we have been talking about what each of those stages looks like from a spiritual perspective.
Yeah, and what I really have loved about all of these conversations so far, Leon, is that it's easy for all of us as parents, caregivers, ministry leaders, teachers, coaches to just see the child, the student in front of us in the present moment, and to forget that they're on this journey developmentally, but also spiritually.
Right.
So this begins from the very beginning.
Yeah. I was just talking with some students in class recently, and I was telling them about a model that Ted Ward, who used to be, he's passed away now, but he was a great professor up at Trinity International up in the Chicago area. And Ted was in the Christian education world, a real scholar in that world. And he came up with this model of the hand. If you think about your hand and look at your hand, palm side up, if each of the fingers represents a different area that we grow spiritually, so physically, emotionally, morally, socially, all the different ways in which we develop in our developmental process, he put the palm as spiritual, yes, which I really, really like. So even though each of those stages happen individually, they all really happen together, and spiritual kind of encompasses all of them. So everything we do is spiritual, which is really a great way, I think, of thinking about this.
Yes, and I love that visual because if we didn't have the palm of the hand, the fingers wouldn't be able to function in the way that they are designed to.
Yeah, good.
And so, our spiritual development, it brings life to every other stage of our development.
It does. So as we walk through these stages, we're thinking in those terms, recognizing that the way they develop cognitively is different at each stage, the way they develop physically is different at each stage, but all that contained within an overarching spiritual understanding.
Yes, absolutely. So today we have the privilege of talking about the stage of high school development. So we're thinking students in grades, 9 to 12. A lot happens in these 4 years, Leon.
It does. Before we get to that, let's just do a little bit of quick review. So we talked about early childhood. We talked like birth to about 5.
Yep.
And we had a guest, a friend of yours, as a guest.
Michaela. Michaela
White.
Right.
And that was a really great episode. And then we talked about the elementary stage, and we had 2 other of your friends
yes,
come
we
and
did.
share with us, right?
Yes, Danelle and Andy, which were both graduates of Bethel Seminary with me, and we talked through just that stage of discovery.
Yeah, and it was really good hearing from them and just their perspective from their own family, because they're in that stage in their own families.
Yes, as parents.
As well as what they do as pastors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And then last week, we talked with one of the pastors you serve with.
That's
David
right.
Morris.
Yep.
And he talked about middle school, and that was a great conversation.
It was.
So today, that brings us to high school.
Uh-huh.
And this is such a... I don't know. This is a really important stage of life. There are so many decisions being made here, And so we've invited a friend of ours.
We
to
have
come.
another friend of
Yes.
both of ours, not just
both
mine.
of ours. Yeah,
both
that's right.
of us.
That's right. In fact, this guest was one of my students.
Oh, man.
And I have stories to tell.
And in fact, this guest was a good friend of mine in college. We got to serve together on student council. So we have Pastor Joel Heald here today.
Yeah. And Joel, it's good to see you. Glad you're here with us.
Very good to be here.
I could tell a long story about Joel, but I'm not going to tell the long version. But let me just say that Joel does a great imitation of Schmeagol and Gollum. From The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah.
He actually
still got it.
He actually did that in one of my classes, which was really interesting and fun and great. And he got lots of extra credit for it. Do you remember that, Joel?
I do. It was a good time. I surprised everybody when I jumped up on a desk.
Yes, yeah, I think you surprised me too.
Oh, man.
All right.
That's good. Well, speaking of stories, before we jump into our conversation with Joel, it's been our tradition on this series, Leon, to share a memory.
Oh, that's right. I almost forgot.
Yes, I'm not going to let you forget.
Okay.
That we have from high school.
Yeah, our own memories from the stage we're talking about.
Yes. So my high school memory is kind of one of those cliche ones, but I think it really resonates with this stage, and it's learning to drive. You know, being able to get your driver's license, getting that independence. I remember the day that I did not have to ride the bus to school any longer, right? I remember the day that my friend, Tiff, she got her license, and so I was able to ride to school with her. She gave me a ride, so we didn't have to ride the bus anymore. And then the day that I got my license and I could drive. And so I just think about like the independence of this stage, and how when we first get a taste of that, it is so very exciting. And being able to just say, okay, now I can go and work a part-time job. I can do these babysitting things. I can go to school functions, and I don't always have to have a ride. I don't have to ask my parents to take me there. So I was just reflecting on the excitement of being able to drive and having friends that could drive, and we could just go and do whatever we, not whatever we wanted, but we could go and be places and not have to think about our parents always taking us.
Yeah, driving is like a special step in this stage of life.
Yes, and it's a special metaphor, I think, too. I believe it's Kara Powell who says this, but it's important for high school students to be given the keys. It's important for them to feel that they have this independence, that they're trusted, and that they can move into independence in this way.
Yeah. Just to throw something in here from our previous conversation, we talked about, when we were talking about the culture that we deal with today, Jonathan Haidt, who said parents tend to be overprotective in the real world, underprotective in the virtual world. One of the things that I've seen, and Joel, you may want to talk about this later, is fewer high school students are getting their driver's licenses. As a result of that overprotection of parents, which is kind of a sad thing because it's such an important step in this age. Well, as I think about my own life at high school, there's a couple things that come to mind. First of all, you may remember that I told you when I was in my elementary years, that's when I started getting interested in sports.
Yes.
And while I love sports, I wasn't always very good at them. And so I made the basketball team, I made the baseball team in high school, but I hardly ever played except baseball. I started playing in baseball more, and so that was like a big step for me in those high school years. But probably the thing that stands out the most is I got my first job in high school. And I worked at a little family-owned hamburger restaurant. And there was this really cute girl there that kind of caught my eye. And so I started paying attention to her a little bit and realized not only was she really cute, but that she was really kind and seemed to at least have interest in a relationship with Jesus. I'm not sure if she understood what that all meant at that point. But we've now been married almost 42 years. So that was
I
kind of
thought this
a
was
special.
the way it was
Yes, yes, because I can't talk about an ex-girlfriend with my wife listening. So so we've been together now. Let's see, we dated for like 3 years before we got married. So we met when we were 17. We married way too young, but. So we're coming up on 42 years in another month.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
So that's a big high school memory.
Yeah, and I love just, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a driver's license, whether it's a job, there's just all these themes of new independence, new responsibility, and how that really forms this stage. So let's jump in and let's talk a little bit more about this stage. And Joel, we kind of have talked a lot about our memories of high school and a bit about who we are, but we'd love to hear you share with us a bit about who you are, your family, and what you love spending your time doing.
Yeah, I am, I have been in vocational ministry for about 16 years, but had, volunteered for 5 as a college student and even did some student leadership for 2 years. So kind of racks up to about 20-ish years in different capacities.
We can't be that old.
It's true.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and you are one of my students. So what does that say about my age?
You're very wise.
Thank you, Joel. You're kind.
I was told this week that I look good for my age when I'd mentioned my son will be in youth group this summer, which I'm not prepared for. But I've been married to my wife. We met in school here, and I think it's 2010, so it'll be 16 years. And so 16 years is next year. I'm planning for 2026, so I'm a year ahead of myself.
Yes.
2 kids. Our son is in 7th grade. Our daughter's in 3rd, and so it's been a wild ride. I've been at College Church here for almost 6 years, which has been a lot of fun because it's where I first volunteered and kind of first cut my teeth in ministry. And so it's a delight to be back.
Yeah, we've talked about that, just the gift it is to be able to have attended here at Olivet and kind of, grown in so many ways. And then that the Lord brought both of us back here to serve in different ways here in the area is really special. So
it is.
So glad that you're with us today. When you think about the high school stage, because Joel, you oversee 6th through 12th grade, right?
7th through 12th.
7th through 12th grade, yes. When you think about your high school students that you get to serve as a youth pastor, what do you love the most about that stage?
I love seeing them begin to own both their faith and an opportunity for leadership. I think part of the beauty of having middle and high school together in our ministry context is in middle school, they see how high school students kind of lead them and then they decide to step up. But I think one of the really fun things to watch is students explore the question of both who am I and what gift do I have to give the community? And they begin to really process that in not just what are they involved with in extracurricular or where are they working at, but what does it mean for me to serve more than just getting service hours, but what do I bring with who I am? What do I contribute meaningfully? Which I think is all just kind of tied into that essential human question of who am I and where do I belong?
Yeah, I think that's so true. And there's so many times, I don't know about you guys, but when I think on my high school days, now that you've shared that, there are so many times that I realized, oh wow, I'm really good at this, and I didn't know that. And now, maybe I need to lean into that a little bit more and share a little bit more. I remember being a part of our school play, and I had never thought of myself as someone who could memorize lines, and do something like that and have fun with it. And a teacher in high school said, hey, I think you would really enjoy this. And I did. So that's a really good point. What are your thoughts there, Leon?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Lindsay. It's a time of discovery, I think, for a lot of students. My friendship group, where do I fit? High school can be such a hard time finding your group, whether it's a sports group or theater group or musical group or a number of other kinds of groups that exist within kind of high school. and trying to find out who I am. Joel, you mentioned they're learning who they are, what their identity is, and that kind of thing. And I think because they're exploring that, I think the role that the church plays, and youth pastors in particular play in the role of in the life of high school students, is pretty important, because our world says you have lots of options in determining your identity, and we all know, of course, we want our students to find their identity in Christ, and recognize that they are created in His image and that they are valuable as they are. They don't have to become something else. So, Joel, talk a little bit about that. You mentioned a little bit in the things that you enjoy most about this age group is kind of their journey of beginning to own their faith. Talk about how you have seen faith developed or passed on to this stage.
Yeah, I think when kids are younger, some of it is just building the foundation blocks and the understanding. Even little kids can ask really good questions, but I think the kinds of questions and what they mean internally in adolescence is a bit different. And so that owning is not just what should I believe, but do I believe this, and how does this integrate with how I understand myself? Who am I? Where do I belong? How do I fit? And so the kinds of questions that students will ask, I think, might sound similar, like why would God let this happen, or how do I fit in? But I think they're a bit more integrative. And the other thing, especially for this stage, because they're right on the edge of emerging adulthood. Questions of doubt and fear, I think, can feel more intimidating if we see it as the potential for loss. But I think for students, they're processing these integrative questions, and part of that is also wrestling with: do I really want to believe this? What does it cost me to believe this? What am I buying into? And so seeing faith passed on to students is also giving them space to wrestle with those things. That is a safe place to come back to, that gives them room to express frustrations and doubts and fears and wonderings that are not inherently dangerous, but are really those deeper questions of, if this is who I am, if this is where I belong, what does it mean for me to really live into this and to own this and to participate in this? And so I think the beauty of ministry with high school students is a part of how they do that is also what kind of activities am I involved in? Who do I hang out with? Where do I serve? It is all of this exploration of who am I becoming? What do I have to offer? Where do I fit in? Where do I belong?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that, Joel. I was thinking as you were talking that last week when we were talking with David, the idea, the concept of really beginning the process of questioning your faith. All these things that I've been taught, do I really believe them? And the kind of the way that I've described this to students is, we teach our kids about Santa Claus, and they get to a point where they begin questioning that. We teach them about the tooth fairy. We teach them all these kinds of things that all of a sudden, as they get a bit older, aren't quite as fun as they used to be. And now looking at the reality of those kinds of things. And in that same category often is, you've taught me that Jesus is real and that He died on the cross for me. Can I trust that?
Yeah.
And so they begin asking those questions. And I know for a lot of people that brings real fear, especially for parents, that their child would ever question that. But my experience, and I'm sure yours as well, is that it's through the questioning that they really solidify what it is that they believe. You mentioned earlier that this is a stage where they begin owning their faith. And so do you see that as part of the journey of owning your faith, that they question and challenge some of the things they've been taught?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are inclined to see, the temptation is to see question or doubt as pulling away when it really is seeking. It's a movement forward. If I wasn't interested, I wouldn't ask. And so I think the part of owning the faith is the process of wrestling with, in the way that Jacob wrestled with God, and it changed his identity. Wrestling is important. It is a movement towards, it's not necessarily a movement away.
Yeah, so providing a safe environment in our youth ministries where they can ask those questions, not be criticized for asking them, but actually encouraged to ask them, and then let's seek an answer together, not just a standard response answer or the to-go answer or the Bible answer, but a real answer. Let's dig together.
Yeah, and I think affirming the value of asking. It's not just question, answer, that I'm the teacher, you're the student. Even in small group, that when any of my leaders are facilitating discussion, if students are wrestling with something, the temptation, especially because so many of them are college students learning to be youth pastors, the temptation is, I know the answer to that. And there are times in which we should resolve it, but there are plenty of times where I tell my leaders, you don't need to answer every question, partially because it doesn't depend on tonight. It's a lifelong process and journey. And if we are just answering questions and just shutting it down, we're resorting back to a black and white process when all of our life we are on this faith journey. And so part of it is honoring the underlying fears or frustrations or worries or anxieties or hopes and dreams that are really underneath those questions and giving space for that. It doesn't mean that we leave everything unanswered, but that there are times where it's like, hey, let's follow up on that next week. So part of giving that space is also not just always answering, because that shuts the conversation down.
That's so true. And when I hear you explain it in that way, I think about giving space to not only the seen, the question being asked, but giving space for the unseen, the things that are underneath those questions that maybe they don't even know how to communicate. But through the Holy Spirit and through relationship, we're able to discern that. And isn't that what Jesus did? When we see him with his disciples, he asked a lot of questions. He also let them ask questions. Did he answer them all the time? No, but he was present in those moments.
That's right. And I love the language of journey. We've talked about this a lot, Lindsay.
I agree.
About this life is a journey, a walking step by step with our students. Joel, I don't know if you remember this from our class. I don't expect that you do because it's been a long, long, long time. But we can do ministry to students, we can do ministry for students, or we can do ministry with students. And I think the with is a hand in hand on the journey together. We're on the journey, they're on the journey. We may be at different places in that journey, but we are still walking it together. And I love that imagery. Yeah.
I think especially taking the faith of students and children seriously is one of the best gifts that we can give to them. That you don't become a real Christian when you become an adult. That the faith of a 5-year-old is just as real as a 15-year-old or a 55-year-old. And so if we understand ourselves as brothers and sisters, that as much as, I'm almost 39, I'm like literally more than 20 years older than most of my students, they are still my brothers and sisters in Christ. And I'm a little farther ahead on them. But what does it mean for me to trust God in this phase of my life is the same question for them. What does it mean for them to trust God in that phase of their life? And so togetherness.
Yeah, and I've stopped looking at, I don't know if I can communicate this in words without imagery. Without a board I can draw it on. So I'll try. But I've stopped using this starting at the bottom and a nice little line that wiggles a little bit but goes up as we grow in our journey with Christ. That's the way it's always been described to me. But I've begun to realize that each stage has its own little journey. Yeah. And it's almost like you don't start over again, but it's not like I can compare myself in my faith journey to a 15-year-old. I would say the significance of where the 15-year-old is as a 15-year-old is just as significant as where I am on my journey at my age. So for me to compare is unfair. Yeah. Where are they on their journey, and not comparing my journey to someone else's journey, but comparing my journey to where I have been and where I am right now and where I want to go. Mm-hmm. And I think when we start doing that, when we start seeing our students as parents, when we start seeing our students not as just our kids, but as a spiritual being who Jesus loves, who is on the journey with me, and we're just at different places in that journey because we're at different ages.
Yeah. I've become convinced that there's only so many lessons we learn in life. We just have to relearn them when the stage changes. What is trust to look like in this stage? It's the same question that I have to ask now when I have kids as before I didn't. So I think if we understand that some of those core foundational questions are the same for us, I think that allows us to be empathetic and to be patient and to take seriously the faith of kids at all of our ages. I know my 12-year-old, how he asks questions and processes his faith is different than my 8-year-old, but that's a part of who they are. And if I can be patient to trust the work of the Spirit in all of that and not be overly anxious to get them to the right answer or the right point, recognize that this is a part of the work of God in their life, in their journey.
Yeah, and honoring where each of them are at this moment.
Yeah,
absolutely. It sounds like you're doing that well.
I hope so. Yeah, we'll find out in 20 years.
I love that, and I love just the picture that you both painted of our spiritual journeys aren't linear. They are always in process, and I like to think of them as just concentric circles. There's like riding a bike. There's different types of bikes. Some bikes need training wheels. Some bikes need, just 2 wheels for a big wheel for the younger ones. Some of them are ready for, a motorbike. I had a chance to ride one of those a few weeks ago, and that was super fun. I've never done that before. The electric ones,
Oh, okay.
And so, but we're all moving, we're all going, and there's respect when you're on a family bike ride to include one another as you go from one place to the next, no matter how you're getting there or what that mode of transportation looks like. So I think it's really important for all of our listeners today, as you think about the kids you love so much at home, at church, at school, to be present with where they are, but know that we're all on this journey, developing and growing.
Yeah. Because I think it's easy. The older we get, I think we tend to be a bit skeptical about this age, just in general in our culture. These are the troublemakers of our culture, this age group. They're learning to drive. They're driving irresponsibly on the road, and, all of those kinds of things. Unfortunately, those are the images we have. And I watch the high school students at the church where I serve, and I'm sure you see this, Joel and Lindsay, as well. We all serve at different churches. Our high school students seem to be the ones that are leading the charge these days when it comes to their spiritual walk. And in many ways, I think they're helping some of us who are further along in the journey to not give up on our first love. And so that excites me about the future.
Yeah.
That's such a good point. And I don't know if you feel this way, Joel, but I think a lot about just the opportunity that we have to walk alongside a generation, and at this point in our lives, as we have been in ministry and we've seen kids grow up, and specifically as a children's pastor, I've seen them from a very young age. And now I get to see so many of them graduating high school, coming to college, even some of them here at Olivet. And I don't want to get emotional, but there is nothing sweeter than seeing these high school and college students, and specifically high school students, making decisions to say, I want to serve Jesus. This is who I am. And, many of them have struggled, many of them still struggle, but to have the privilege to walk alongside them through those different stages and seeing how God is using them now really inspires me, and it challenges me in my faith to say, when I get to hear what God's doing in their lives, like, oh gosh, as you're saying, Joel, all these things are true no matter what stage we're at. We're still asking the same questions, and it challenges me to ask, how am I trusting the Lord now, just as they are trusting the Lord? Even though they're much younger than I am, but just the privilege to see them grow in that way is really special.
Yeah, one of the really neat opportunities about being at College Church right next to Olivet is when some of my students will then go to Olivet. Usually when a student graduates high school, you see them like on break. And so It's been really neat to see some students that I still get to interact with them for 4 or 5 years. And I think thinking about this integration, who they are, what gift do I bring, I think one of the beautiful things is when students understand that regardless of their vocation, they are making the decision to live into who God has designed them to be, whether or not that is a pastor or a teacher or a psychiatrist or a lawyer. But that in all of those things, they're deciding, I want to. God has made me to be this person who serves and loves and helps in this way, and I'm following Jesus by becoming a veterinarian or becoming a psychiatrist or becoming an elementary school teacher. And I think that's a beautiful opportunity to see here, and just to see how that kind of comes to fruition.
Yeah, understanding vocation that way, I think, is such a healthy understanding. You don't have to be a pastor to serve God faithfully. So, yeah, that's good insight, Joel.
It is.
So, as you think about, we've talked about a lot of different things today that are all really important to understand about this age group. What one thing would you want parents to know? If you could just boil this all down into a single thought, what would you want? Maybe that's unfair, a single thought. Who of us has a single thought? But if you could boil it down, what things would you want parents to leave our conversation with today?
Yeah. As I was thinking about that, there's probably 2 things. The first is for them to be honest and sincere about their own faith journey. I think sometimes in adulthood, we feel like we've resolved the questions of adolescence, and hearing our adolescents then ask them can drudge up stuff in us. And so I think just being sincere, that we might have pushed aside the question of how can a good God let bad things happen, that type of thing. And then when our high school student starts asking it, we get confronted with it again. So I think just being sincere with ourselves, about where we are at in our faith journey, and that we don't need to be afraid of that. And that, to me, connects directly with learning to be a non-anxious presence with our high school student. That it is a normal thing for them to experience heartache and hurt and hang-ups, and to ask questions, and to want to be able to drive the car more than they should or faster than they should. And there are absolutely ways where, like, as a parent, we have to be the guardrails because, their prefrontal cortex and filter isn't all the way on. But if we react if we react negatively or poorly every time a student asks a hard question, they're going to learn that they can't ask those questions. And so we need to be the place where our kids can come to, because Google and ChatGPT and TikTok are always options, and they feel easy, but we don't want our kids going there, because you can ask anything you want to a Google and it doesn't judge you for it. So we need to, as parents, be non-anxious presence in the lives of our students, which is going to begin with our own self-awareness and just acknowledging that, like, if our kid who grew up singing on the platform and going to VBS and all that suddenly comes home and says, I don't know that I believe in God anymore, the worst thing we can do is lose our mind, because that will corner them. But I think sometimes the best question is, tell me more about that. Just an open invitation that is non-judgmental, that invites our kids to be honest, because our faith is a lifelong journey. We're on it too. And I think sometimes we see in our teenagers questions that we aren't sure that we really want to deal with. But that's just a part of what it is to be a teenager. So sincerity in our own faith, and being a non-anxious presence for our own kid.
That's so good.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so what I hear you saying is just being sincere, being open to them, being willing to listen, be willing to recognize that you are on the journey as well, and there are things that you're uncertain about, mm-hmm. and you don't have to have answers to all the questions, but you need to walk through it with them.
Yeah. I don't know how to answer that is often, I think, the thing that parents get afraid of. which is okay. Part of it is our kids are asking different questions than I was when I was a teenager, because the world is different, the assumptions are different, and that's okay. And so to say, I don't know, but let's find out together is a wonderful invitation. As a parent, even as a pastor, we don't have all the questions. We're not able to answer everything, and that's okay. And so we don't need to live under the burden of the pressure that we need to know all those things, but we get to discover them together.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that there is such truth to discovering faith together, that we can actually begin to enjoy one another in new ways. And so I just want to remind parents out there with high school students that may be feeling a lot of challenge, a lot of pushback, a lot of, does this ever get easier? I think there's joy and there's connection underneath all of it that the Lord has for you. And I find high school students some of the best companions, and just they do bring a lot of joy to life, and that they can help us to see new things and challenge us in new ways to build faith through each other and through that relationship.
Yeah, that's a good summary, Lindsey. I think, if we're a parent who's really having some struggles with our teens and we're trying to work through that together, it's part of the journey. Let me add that as a professor who sees these students in the next stage of life, as college students, that one of the wonderful things about a Christian university is that as they're continuing to wrestle with these questions, they're now in an environment where those questions are being supported through a biblical perspective. And, professors at Christian universities, part of their dream and their joy is to not only teach these students in the classroom, but to invest in their lives and to help them on this journey. I think, Joel, you have a wonderful privilege of not only having these students as high school students, but then many of them sticking around, attending Olivet and going back to College Church, and you continuing to invest in their lives. And I'm sure you see the importance of that movement from high school to a Christian university where they're being supported in that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Remembering that adolescence goes into our mid-20s, and part of that is our brain development, part of that is social stuff. The how we continue to support students and our kids in those stages is so important. Yeah.
Well, we'll end it with that. I hope
that couldn't highlight our next episode better.
No,
our next
that's right.
episode
As
is going
we
to
look
talk
at
about college students.
Yeah. So, wow, this has been a good conversation. It's been helpful for me to just kind of remember the importance of this stage. I don't really work with high school students, so I kind of forget about it. I work with kids, and then I work with college students. Don't work too much with the in-between. So it's a good reminder for me. And for you, if you're a parent of a high school student, we are hopeful that the conversation we've had today will bring some insight and encouragement to you as you continue to parent your kids. Well, Joel, thank you for being with us. It's a privilege to have a former student in the area to continue building that relationship. I want you to know that you're doing great work at College Church, and I'm thankful for you.
Thank you.
And I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
I would agree, Joel. It's great to have you with us, and it's always great to call you a friend.
Yeah. Let me add just one more thing. If you're a high school pastor out there, thank you for the work that you do. Continue to do it. We rely so much on you. We know that parents are the key spiritual voice in the life of a student, but something happens in the high school years where the parents seem to have a little less influence in that. And friendships and people like youth pastors kind of elevate their influence. And so thank you for those of you who are investing your lives in that. Whether you're a pastor or a youth worker, thank you for the work that you're doing. So thank you for joining us today. May the Lord bless you, keep you, and give you peace. You've been listening to the Faith Together podcast from the Center for Faith and Family at Olivet Nazarene University. Sign up for additional resources at centerff.com. When building faith, we are better together.